Hello, I'm Margaret Urban, and I'm on the conversation design team at Google. Today, I'll be talking about the foundations of conversation and how they help define the principles of natural-sounding conversation design. So let's talk about conversation. People grow up talking, and they do it all the time. Babies as young as 22 days already show patterns of brain activity in response to speech that mirror adult brain behaviors during conversations. After 6 months, those same babies are producing words. So, how hard can it be? Well, it's not that simple. The process of human speech recognition and understanding is deeply complicated. We hear and assess speech sounds and combine them into words. We process those words into phrases and sentences. Then we have to work out both the literal and the social meaning of what we've heard and interpret those layers of meaning in the context of the conversation. That includes everything from what time it is to what's on the news. The beauty of it is this: we converse with the same instant, unconscious competence and effortless grace of a dog catching a frisbee. Those dogs are not performing vector and acceleration calculations. They just jump and catch. The metaphor I like to use for language is this: the fish does not think about the water. We understand and produce language so easily, it seems it should be easy for anyone to construct natural, comfortable conversations for a virtual agent. But once you start investigating all the layers, all the channels, all the factors, the simplicity disappears. Language is a core survival tool, and its use and our response to it are built in. Effectively, we're evolutionarily programmed for language use, and there are some specific effects that fall out from that programming. Here are a couple of takeaways from Clifford Nass, who did a lot of research in this space. When we hear speech, our brains assume a human producing that speech. This means that we react in the same way to both recorded and synthetic speech as we do to live human speech. But these responses are unconscious and automatic, which is a critical reminder about usability testing as it relates to speech. In another experiment by Nass and Moon, when debriefed, the subjects insisted that they would never respond socially to a computer, and after the testing, they vehemently denied the social behaviors they had exhibited. So that was some context of human language use. Now, to understand conversation design, let me unpack some of the features of conversation. Try saying this out loud. Conversation is physical. Now think about how you did that. You had to breathe in and then had to simultaneously push out the air, vibrate your vocal cords, and make the shapes in your throat and mouth to create the right sounds. That's a very complicated choreography. Frankly, that's why small children sound funny. They haven't mastered the mechanics of speaking yet. There are consequences to this physical grounding. For instance, we speak in breath units, the amount of speech that can be supported by one lungful of air. The speech signal, the sounds we create and hear, is linear. That means there's no rewind, no pause, no fast forward. And lastly, that signal is ephemeral. It does not persist. When it's gone, it's gone. In conversation, information is distributed. That way, cognitive load is minimized by not overloading each packet in the signal. Remember those breath units? Generally, you'll find one piece of core information or a small set of closely related core pieces in each breath unit. Participants in a conversation build their shared knowledge piece by piece over time, not by delivering it all in one clump. Just think about all the knowledge my coworker and I have to share to have this short conversation. That includes things like, who's Daniel? What's a shot? And why is the time relevant? The knowledge we already share drives the progress of our conversation. And shared context also speeds up conversation immensely. Imagine having to explain all these things every single time you were just going for coffee. Another core attribute of conversation is that it is cooperative. Paul Grice was a philosopher of language who proposed a cooperative principle for conversation, that participants in a conversation cooperate to achieve a mutual communicative goal. As part of this, he described 4 rules now known as Grice's maxims. Quality, tell the truth. Quantity, give the right amount of information. Manner, be organized and comprehensible, and relation, make your input relevant. Another part of this cooperation is that participants take turns. This exchange of control allows for the construction of shared context. Within just the speech signal, there are multiple layers of information: speed, prosody, volume, which provide meaning and aid interpretation. But in a prototypical conversation, the participants are co-located. They're in the same place. They can see and hear each other, and the conversation is built on the fly, in the moment, dynamically. That means that conversation is inherently multimodal. There's a host of visual signals, things like mouth movements, facial expressions, hand gestures, body language, and the proximity of the other person that come into play. These associated signals are so strongly linked that we cannot stop producing them, even when they're not necessarily relevant. We've all been on the phone with someone miles away, still making faces and waving our hands around. So how do we approach designing for conversations across modalities? Conversation design is about teaching computers to be fluent in human conversation and its conventions. But they can't do everything we can do yet, so there are some best practices to apply. First, start with what humans do. Computers should adapt to the communication system that humans already know. This helps create an intuitive and frictionless experience. Next, automated speech recognition does have technical limitations that create cases that just don't exist in human conversations. For instance, a human conversation never fails due to an unrecoverable error. It doesn't have to start with a hot word or a long press, and we certainly don't have to turn on our ears. It's important to create recovery strategies for a digital entity that hasn't mastered human language yet. And lastly, in other ways, computers can exceed human capabilities. Computers don't get tired of being asked the same questions over and over, and they don't mind being given commands. They can remember everything and quickly find and share that information. It's important to leverage these technical strengths in design. Conversation designers are architects for the interaction, curators for the user experience, and teachers for the system. It's a bit like creating a bonsai. You want the natural expression of the tree, but you train and prune that tree to the best shape of that expression. In visual interaction design, there's a metaphor at work. The metaphor of representing physical surfaces in a digital environment. This makes use of concepts like object permanence, mass, gravity, layers, physical space, light, movement, etc. For example, sometimes a cursor turns into a hand shape to show the user that they can do things that a hand normally does, like grasp and move. If you think about drag and drop functionality, the thing being dragged needs to have some mass, it needs a space to be dragged in, and you have to have gravity to drop it into place. Conversation design is a type of interaction design, but it doesn't use a metaphor and it doesn't create a new interaction model. It applies one that already exists. As my colleague James Jangola puts it, use the system that people learned first and know best. And Cliff Nass would add, and that they evolved to use. At Google, we use a design framework which defines interaction types based on where they fall on the multimodal spectrum. The spectrum goes from fully voice-only at one end to fully visual-only at the other, with an interesting overlap of modalities in the middle. We use these interaction types to categorize devices in order to understand better how to design experiences for those devices, but it wouldn't scale well to create a specific design for each device or even each category. At a high level, these are the major components of a multimodal response. There are prompts that are spoken and ones that show up on the screen, both of which maintain the same conversation with the user. Supplemental visuals can take the form of cards, carousels, tables, lists, and so forth, while suggestion chips can play a role in continuing the conversation. To design naturally and scalably across devices, think of them in terms of what interaction type they represent. Then make sure the content being presented to the user is appropriate to the modalities available to them. And finally, sometimes it feels as though we've lost communication because of social distancing, but we still have conversation. Just be judicious. On Mother's Day, my brother and sisters and I all got on a video call with my mom and we had a lovely time. But tracking all the signals from all the people was really challenging. Later, my mom said, "It's easier just to talk on the phone." So we still have regular video calls to catch up face to face, but we actually talk on the phone all the time. There's a moral to this. Just because the technology is there, just because a channel is available, doesn't mean that using it is the right strategy. Make sure that what is presented across modalities is relevant. There's Grice again. More is not always better. Make sure that you design to cooperate with your users, sharing context, matching their expectations, and providing the right information at the right time. And most of all, start with the conversation, the oldest new interface. Thank you.